Welcome to our second webinar in our series of webinars for the Financial Health for Seniors project that CSI has taken on. As you know, CSI is working on this project to be able to provide resources, presentation material, and webinars to our designation holders. The focus for us is really on our designation holders and helping them to be able to better serve seniors. Not only are our designation holders advisors, but they're also people who have families, who have parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, all of whom hit this aging situation where that requires attention. And so these webinars are designed not only to help the advisor advise, but also help them with their personal lives. Eventually, our real goal is to have our advisors go out into the community and talk to seniors and their families about the issues that they're going to face as they age. So our greatest contribution here can be the contribution that we can make to our seniors through our designation holders. Just a few housekeeping items. All attendees for this session are on mute. You can ask questions by pressing the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll hold all the questions for the end when we'll have kind of a Q&A session with Neela. We're not providing continuing education credits for these webinars because they're quite short. And we're working on a few webinars in French, so stay tuned, there are more to come. So I'd like to now introduce Neela White. So Neela is a holder of several CSI designations, including the FCSI, the CIWM, and the CIM. She is also a holder of the EPC and the CPCA, and she's an FMA. She works as a portfolio manager at 3Max, which is a division of Raymond James. She has a focus on aging and has been particularly affected in her own family by the aging of her own parents. And we'll talk a lot about her personal experience as well as her experience as an advisor. She is also a contributing editor, a contributing writer for Silver Links magazine, a magazine that's aimed at seniors. And she does speak at conferences and events. She received a BA from Western Ontario in psychology and has a degree in gerontology from McMaster University. Neela is one of our designation holders. She is an advisor like the rest of you on the phone. Her day job is not giving presentations, but she's kindly offered to give her perspective on starting the conversation. Neela, over to you.
Thank you, Marie. That was a great introduction. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time today to log into this call. I think it's really important that we get a good sense of what's happening with our aging demographic, how it's applicable to ourselves and to our clients, and what it means as far as savings, retirement plans, investment strategy going forward. During the first half of the 21st century, nothing will have had as great an impact on our society as the aging of our population. The demographic shift that we are witnessing will touch virtually every aspect of our society. It will force us to make dramatic changes to our healthcare system. It will call into question the viability of many of our social programs, and it has altered the workforce and the broader economy. Yet we as a society remain largely unprepared for the silver tsunami that has arrived. Every day we're reading articles, whether it's on social media or in the printed press or just on the local news, that the population is getting older, not just in Canada, but worldwide. People are living longer and healthcare needs are changing. But maybe what we're not hearing, which will be a bit shocking, I think, is that in 2016, there were more than 8,230 centenarians. That was the fastest growing demographic between 2011 and 2016. Among people 100 years old and older, for every 5 females, there was 1 male. We know that women are living longer than men, and that still continues to be the case. According to StatsCan, by 2031, there will be 17,000 centenarians, and by 2061, close to 80,000 people who are 100 years and older. For those of you who have clients who had children in 2011, a girl born in 2011 has a 33% chance of living to the age of 100, and a boy born in 2011 has a 25% chance of living to the age 100. So that actually changes the conversation that we're having with our clients who are young parents, because One, how much longer are you going to need to save to help your children have their start? What does it mean for an RESP? And also with the new phenomena of the millennials moving back home, living in their parents' basement, what happens now when children are living to 100 years old? If everything remains constant, this is what our population is going to look like by 2036. So what we can see in the lighter blue area is that the number of Canadians under the age of 15, and in the gray area, those between the ages of 15 and 64, is shrinking slightly. But what we notice in the bright blue areas, the number of Canadians over the age of 65 is continuing to grow rapidly, and it's almost doubling between now and 2036. This is significant because a smaller group of working age Canadians are going to have a much larger dependent population, particularly the elderly, to support. And the cost of elder programs is going to have to increase. By 2030, 25% of our population is going to be senior citizens, of which I'll be one of them, actually. We're hearing and seeing trends in the increase in popularity right now of intergenerational living, multi-generational living. So this has always been in society, and it's more also been a cultural-based living situation. But what we're seeing now, due to financial situations, is that people are either moving in with their parents because financially they need to, or parents are living with their children because they need the care. So as there's more and more stress on the system, we're going to see that as a continuing trend. In 2011, 1.3 million people lived in multi-generational homes. In 2012, 28% of our population were caregivers. 25% of boomers have parents who require financial assistance, and 20% of Canadian working baby boomers have nothing saved for retirement. And we can see what the impact of this would be if your parent, your client, has not saved enough for their retirement. What happens to you, the next generation, the sandwich generation, who will be split between how do I save for my children's education and help support them, and how do I help support my mom and dad, aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa? There's a 50% chance that couples age 65, that at least one member within that couple is going to live to the age of 95. There's a 90% chance that one member will experience a significant health condition like stroke or dementia before the age of 95. So imagine a couple, your client, who might be now 80, 85, and suddenly this is a situation where one person ends up becoming caregiver. The risk that we can see within a couple is, what tends to happen is a lot of the financial resources is used on the first person who requires help. It's drawn down, and then as a result, we're left with, when the caregiver need ends due to death, we're left with the second person who suddenly now needs care, and there's much less resource available for that care. So significant planning, I think, has to be put in place as part of the retirement plan for what happens within a couple situation. Alzheimer's, and the broader term, the umbrella term, is dementia, and Alzheimer's being part of dementia. Right now in 2008, we see that one new case was diagnosed every 5 minutes. By 2038, one new case is going to be diagnosed every 2 minutes. Every 3 seconds, someone in the world develops dementia. In Canada, by 2031, it is projected that the total annual health costs for Canadians with dementia will have doubled from the previous 2 decades, so that being from $8.3 billion to $16.6 billion. So again, when you're having conversations with your clients about possible risks as they begin to age, plans need to be put in place. Let's say we start seeing signs of dementia. Who would you like me to contact? What would you like me to do? Can I talk to your family about this? We're also hearing a lot from the government lately about the whole aging in place and how it's a holistic way of aging. And indeed, the care that you receive at home is far better than the care you'd probably receive in an institution. And that being because the ratio of caregiver to care recipient is 1-to-1. The caregiver tends to know your likes, your dislikes, your habits, and they have the time and the emotion involved to take care of you. So we're seeing that there is a push to age in home, but part of that push is because of cost. There is not enough rooms right now in nursing homes to accept people in. Therefore, putting the onus back on community and back on family is a more viable option. So if somebody decides to, and this is just a very basic calculation, if somebody decides to age in place and they required 24-hour care, the hourly rate, for a PSW, that's a personal support worker, is in anywhere between $28 and $35 an hour. The annual cost of care could be as expensive as $262,800. I'd like to present a case study of a client who was one of my clients, and just go through the reality of what this could actually look like. And it's not what people are actually thinking about. 83-year-old female widow. She lives with her daughter, son-in-law, and granddaughter. She was a 5-time cancer survivor, and her last case of cancer ending in a double mastectomy 8 years ago while her husband was dying of pancreatic cancer. 5 years ago, she had a very mild heart attack and fell headfirst into a wall, breaking her neck and surviving disabled. After about 6 months of rehabilitation, all the professionals who were attending to her care recommended it was time to discharge back to the family, and they were positive and asked, I hate to use the word guaranteed, but very much stressed that yes, the client would get at least 10 hours of care by CCAC. The family accepted her back into their home, and CCAC came back in, which is now the new LHIN, which will soon not be the LHIN, and she was assessed as being able to provide 3 hours a week as opposed to 10 hours a day. And here's what the care gap cost. This was out of pocket after tax dollars. The family put in place 12 hours of care a day. They were able to negotiate with the care provider $29 an hour. There's non-stat days and public holidays, so that's at a different cost, and that cost came up to about $129,108 a year. But on top of that expense, when the grandchild would be on vacation from school, the family would go on vacation, so that would be about 4 weeks a year. It costs $250 a night for somebody to sleep at the house to make sure everything was safe with the client. And physiotherapy, because OHIP wasn't providing it past 8 visits, the family hired a private physiotherapist to come into the house to help the client just basically try to maintain as much ability as she had, and as well as her independence. The total yearly cost of care was $142,218 after tax. May long weekend of 2018, the client was diagnosed with rapid onset dementia, and she was given 3 to 12 months to live. On August 25th, 2019, the client did die. Within the 5 years of requiring care, she spent just under $500,000. This is very unfortunate, but this was the cost of aging in place. This was the client's wish that she had expressed with her kids. This case is very near and dear to my heart because this case was my mom. And this is the day everything changed in 30 seconds, both her life and our lives. A conversation that we should start having with our clients, especially as they are thinking about maybe now that the kids have left home, if they've not returned home, and downsizing, is what's the average cost of where you want to age? Do you think you're going to be aging in place? Do you think you're going to be aging in a retirement home? Do you think one day you are going to need a nursing home because you do not have finances for independent living? So if we choose to live at home, you can see from my mom's example of what the care cost was, and that's client paid. When mom was diagnosed with rapid onset dementia, we did start looking for nursing homes. I live in Mississauga, and our Lynn care coordinator told us that the wait list to get mom into a nursing home at that time, so that would have been in June of 2019, was 2 to 8 years. Mom had 3 to 12 months left to live. We, at that point, started looking at retirement homes, and the home we chose, we were able to get her into a memory care unit, and the cost was just under $10,000 a month, and that was for 24-hour care. So we can see when we're talking to clients, we do need to make sure that they are thinking about what the cost of aging is. And that's something that needs, or maybe a gap in a retirement plan. We know that, you know, when we retire, we're looking forward to what comes after, traveling the world, finally enjoying the fruits of our labor. Little later on down the road, though, we do need to start thinking about these sorts of issues. And also, if we don't, adversely, if we do not think of these issues, how will it impact our children? Fully 1/2 of all elder income is from government programs. The extent to which Canadians are relying on government programs is presenting a major issue because it's putting enormous pressure on programs like OAS and OHIP and CPP. And in the coming years, as our population continues to age and the dependency ratio increases and our tax base is shrinking, this will become problematic. 40% of baby boomers expect government pensions to be their primary or secondary source of income. 65% of Canadians say that thinking about retirement and retirement expenses and saving for retirement causes them stress and anxiety. I, for one, know that when we have to deal with something stressful or something that creates anxious feelings, what do we all tend to do? We avoid it. This is something that should not and really cannot be avoided. About 50% of people between the ages of 50 and 65 have saved $100,000 or less for retirement, and 20% have saved nothing. So again, go back to the situation of maybe mom or dad has saved nothing, the kids aren't aware of this, they require help, and they just had children now that are off to university or they're saving for university. That puts a bit of pressure on both sides of the equation of how are we all going to finance this. Again, we know that OAS, CPP, and OHIP are all programs dependent on the current tax base. In 1966, there were 3.5 workers for every 1 senior. In 2015, there was 1 worker for every 3 seniors. The value right now of caregivers' unpaid labor to the Canadian economy has been estimated to be between 25 to $26 billion, and that will only continue to rise. Canada loses 500,000 employees from the workplace every year due to caregiving responsibilities. Wages lost by caregivers due to absenteeism, reduced work hours, or just plain leaving is 221 million for females and 116 million for men. So also when we're dealing with our clients, I think it's really important to have deeper conversations with our clients, encouraging them to actually talk with their parents or those around them who they think they're going to have or be responsible for, because this has a financial consequence on them, which they may not be aware of. The largest expenditure by the federal government right now is OAS. 40 billion was spent in 2013, and it's projected to be 68 billion in 2036. So that's a differential right now of $28 billion. What we saw, I think it was in 2012, was that they were trying to push out the age to collect OAS from 65 to 67. When I look at these numbers, I end up thinking, where will OAS be when I retire? Will there be enough, or will the age be pushed out? Or will the means testing be a little bit different at that point? Healthcare as well is a cost that is obviously increasing. Right now, half of the healthcare budget is attributed to our seniors. The additional funds needed for elder care by 2038 is going to be $48 billion. More than half of Canadians right now don't know how they're going to pay their medical expenses. There was an article in the Globe and Mail mentioning that caregivers is a very undersupported and under-recognized job. 1 in 6 caregivers right now are taking care of more than one person. I believe female caregivers are at more risk right now. Female caregivers tend to be the caregiver of choice, and it's still, I think, an idea of nature and nurture. It still is predominantly a female that will raise her young family, and it will also tend to be a female that will also take care of the aging parents. Right now, we do know that it still exists that women are earning 87 cents on the dollar for comparable work that a man's doing, so you're already in a lesser income position. We know that more than half of females are caregivers, of which almost 3/4 of them are employed. There's what's termed a mummy tax, and what the mummy tax is, there's a 12% wage gap between those women who have families, children, and those that do not. And we know right now that there are many women living with low income. And on average, women take 12 years out of their working careers to take care of people. I think key considerations when we are talking to our female clients is to make them aware that the loss of wages, loss of retirement savings, loss of benefits, and the impact on personal health will all have an impact on the overall plan of retirement. Again, wages lost due to absenteeism is higher for a female than it is for a male. One national study on women and caregiving highlighted the conflict between work and elder care. The study found that 33% of women decreased their work hours, 29% of women gave up a job promotion, training, or assignment, 22% took a leave of absence, 20% went from full-time to part-time work, 16% quit their jobs, and 13% retired early. And I think the last two numbers are the ones that are most concerning. If you find out today that your parent has a major health incident and it is looking as if this will be an end-stage disease, and you decide, I am going to spend until I no longer have to be a caregiver, I'm going to spend it with mom or dad. How prepared are you, your client, to leave their job having no pay? What's their backup plan? Are they prepared to retire early? Are they prepared for the consequence of once the caregiver role is finished due to death, returning to the work world possibly won't be the same because they would have lost a gap of time? I know our industry doesn't like the word guarantee, but I'm fairly certain I can use the word guarantee. I can guarantee almost certainly that one day we will all be care recipients, and one day we too may be caregivers, whether it's to our children, to our parents, or to our broader family at large. There are many, many costs to caregiving, and for those of you who have experienced it, I'm sure that you can relate to all of this. Depending what type of disease the person has, it can be very physically taxing. There's a greater incidence of stress-related illnesses. We know that it's mentally exhausting. We know that it's very emotionally stressful to be a caregiver. It can be financially draining. It can be very socially isolating. And obviously the impact that it will have on your job. Assumptions. We all make assumptions. I think that is just part of human nature. But there's a couple assumptions that I think we should be very, very wary of making. One is that we will remain healthy. I had a fall on Christmas Day. I hit my back in 2 places and hit the back of my head. And it made me very, very aware that falling at 50 is very different than falling at 25. You tend to recover not as quickly, and that was my reality check. We assume that the government will provide for us because we've paid into the tax system our working lives. We may have an assumption that our money will last forever. And I think the most dangerous assumption is that our families will be our caregivers. That is a very, I think that is a very selfish decision to make without actually talking to your family members. Caregiving is a very different job, and not everybody's equipped or trained or able to do it, and I think that has to be recognized. What can derail a retirement plan? We can live too long and outlive our money, we could die too soon, or we could become sick or disabled. I put together a little starting the conversation checklist, and it's conversations like this that I have with my clients just gradually, so it's not an intimidating, I want to put my head in the sand conversation. I think we need to restructure how we present what our life looks like, as opposed to saying, okay, a will is in preparation of death, a power attorney is in preparation of incapacity. How about let's start today before those things happen and discuss with our client, what is the unique story that they have to tell? Did they come to Canada as a new immigrant? Are there things that they've done that they're particularly proud of, achievements? And I think this is important information for the younger generation to know about the legacy that's being left to them. You know, what do you want your community to know about you? Have you discussed the wishes that you have with your family? Within your own community, have you investigated what the retirement home options are, what the assisted living options are, nursing home, group living? Also, have you looked into what the various costs are and how sustainable and realistic are the costs? Very important is, do you have a power of attorney for care and property in place? And the person that you've chosen to be the POA, have you told them? Or is it going to catch them by surprise? Do you have a will that's been updated? Again, does your executor know that they're your executor? And for both the power of attorney and executor, do they know where the documents are? After my father died, and that would have been about 10 years ago, we were helping my mom clean out his stuff. And I found some share certificates in a recycling grocery bag. And when I showed them to my mom, I had asked her, you know, how long has this been sitting there? Well, I don't know, it doesn't look that important to me. So I think it's very important to start organizing important documents, color code the folders, let somebody know where these documents are. Having conversations with anyone creates change. I think that as advisors, having conversations that are difficult, they're emotional, they're uncomfortable. Having those conversations with your client will deepen your client relationship. I think it increases the likelihood that if something were to happen, the assets would stay with you because you were the person that was able to guide them through something that involves a lot of emotion and be more organized in the thought process to help them along. I think it creates an emotional moat around your client. And then I think when we are having these deeper conversations, you are, you know, practicing holistic wealth management. I came across a quote a while ago, and this was a profound quote for me, actually. Today is the oldest you've ever been and the youngest you'll ever be again. So I'd like to thank you all for logging in and taking the time to listen to my story. And I think now we're on to questions.
Thank you, Neela. So just a few things. We have one question, which is whether people will have access to the slides. We're videotaping the session, so we'll have access to the video as well as to the slides. I have a couple of questions for you based on what I'm hearing, Neela. One is, you've highlighted the position of women, and most often what happens in a couple, we always think, you know, the parents die and the children get the wealth. However, what often happens is the father dies, or the husband dies, and the mother, there's one of the two partners, it can be a same-sex marriage, but one of the two partners is left and can be left for a long time. What is your advice to women in order to prepare for a future where they don't have a partner with them?
Well, I think what I would start to do in that sort of situation is maybe, and this is a difficult thing to do because no one wants to say while somebody's unwell, they're going to shortchange that person of care. But I think it's really recognizing the fact that as women are living longer, you need to make sure that there are the funds available. And I think it really is breaking down, okay, if the pool for healthcare is $200,000, at what point do you say, okay, the first 100,000 spent, we need to start looking at options that are government funded. We need to start the process earlier than later of getting into a nursing home. So here would be an example. For a female whose husband's been diagnosed with, let's say, cancer, or let's say any form of dementia that's progressive, you know that the disease will progress to the point where you are no longer able to take care of them. Before it progresses to that point, what should happen is Lynn should be contacted, a nursing home application should be filled out. That way it is in place that by time care gets to the point where it's no longer supportable financially or by the primary family caregiver, at least you are that much closer to getting into a nursing home, or if you're still in home at that point, you'd be considered higher on the need list and you would start receiving more hours in, which means that that would be covered by OHIP as opposed to personal finances.
Okay, thank you for that. I have a question from Danielle Cormier. Do you know what are the resources in New Brunswick equivalent to LINH?
No, actually, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with most other provinces outside of Ontario. Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, maybe Danielle, make a note of that and try and get some information for you. I have a second question for you, and just a reminder that you can ask questions by clicking on the Q&A button to those of you who are out there. How do you start a conversation with a couple when you're sitting there, you're talking about their finances? How do you get into these sort of difficult conversations? Where do you
start?
Yeah.
Something I've recommended to people that it might be an easier way to start a conversation is talk about either yourself, because obviously what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So you could, go from finances, okay, how much income are you going to need in retirement, move into, okay, within retirement, you should have a healthcare fund set up. Have you thought about if something were to happen where you're going to live, and then bring it on to yourself. I had this conversation with my husband, and we decided that when our daughter's done university and moves away from home, that we are going to downsize and put away X amount of dollars for our healthcare. I would always move it into the amount of resources needed for the type of retirement you want, then move it into the healthcare need within retirement, and then so it doesn't become very stressful or you're putting the client on the spot, relate it to yourself. This is what I did. This is the conversation I had with my husband or my wife or my partner. Or I just listened to a webinar, and this lady told a story about how she spent how her mom spent $500,000 on her care. Can you believe that? What do you think would happen if you had a stroke, you had a heart attack? So I would always make it relatable to yourself. That way you're guiding it.
Right. No, that's very good. If you start with yourself, it's less threatening than starting with somebody else. We're all in the same boat. Excellent. I have a question from Roma. At what is the right age to start the conversation? And do I speak to my client about wills and POA? When?
Okay. So I'm going to, again, do this in relation to myself because I have to practice what I preach. I've had the conversation with my 15-year-old daughter, and I had it with her probably the first time when she was about 13 years old. And it was really going through if something were to happen to me, Lauren, what do you think that you could do? What do you feel comfortable with? So I related it to myself and her dad. So I think really any age that you think the recipient is able to process the information is a good age. But outside of children, then I would especially think a good age to start this would be, let's say your kids are done university and they move back home. I think it's important to start that conversation for two reasons with them. One, if they're living back with you, something happening to you has impact on them. Two, if they live with you longer than what you thought would happen, their living with you has impact on you. So I think really in and around the age of starting university, I think has impact, because their next step is they're going to start working for a living, in which case, they would start building assets. I think that's a good time. When your clients have children, that's a very important time to start talking about wills or POAs, because now children are involved. So I think, personally, I think the younger the better, because I think maybe the conversation is easier and more receptive. I think having a conversation like that when we're much, much older, the endpoint may seem a little more, a little closer, so you feel a little more sensitive to that. So I wouldn't say there's necessarily a recommended age. I would say any age is a good age. Start the conversation, but especially at key points, university, moving back home, getting married, having children, having assets. And it's not just even having assets. A power of attorney for care is so important, because it could be somebody is not paying attention while they're crossing the road, their face is in their phone and somebody turns against a light and you get hit. If you do not die, what is it that you would like to do? What measures would you like somebody to take? Take the guesswork out for somebody, because I'll tell you, you think that being able to provide end of life is easier, especially if that's what the person has always talked to you about. It is much more difficult when you actually have to do it. It helps when you have a document actually specifying it. It takes a bit of the emotion out and puts a bit of reasoning into a very emotionally charged situation. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, I think it does. How do you get the children involved? Because very often as an advisor, you're dealing with a single client. You haven't met the spouse, and then there's the children, and all of a sudden it's kind of it needs to be a family affair, and it hasn't been. It's not traditionally when you start. So how do you bring the family in there?
For me, when my mom was living with us, we had, because she was living with us and it was close, we had a lot of conversations around the table about if something were to happen, what do you want to happen? How do you express that? Is it okay to express that? I think that's pretty important. I think when maybe grandparents are in retirement homes or nursing home or needs help like within the home or their environment, I think it's important to bring the kids along to see what aging can involve, what type of care is involved. And it, I think, opens a little crack to having that conversation about care and what happens if something happens. So I think the younger you start, possibly the better. So it's not this big, this big barrier, this big wall of discomfort.
Okay, so that's speaking from the family point of view. Now when you're speaking from an advisor point of view, how do you get your client to bring their rest of their family in?
Oftentimes I tell them, most of my clients are aware of my family situation. They're aware of what I went through with my father and the cost, aware of what I went through with mom and the cost. So I'm very transparent about that. I think the more you can tell your story to your client, the more it becomes, hey, this isn't all just slides with numbers and statistics and research articles. This is real and she's experienced it. Through conversations with them about my own second job, let's say, of being a caregiver, it will be, hey, have you spoken to your parents about getting extra care for your dad when he starts to progress within dementia? So here's my story. You know what the cost was, you know what I went through. Have you addressed this with your parents? And if you haven't, why not? And for the clients who have younger children, stuff like that, are you starting to speak to them? Because it could be something like a hockey accident, a skating accident. So I think it's, what sort of conversations are you having that's relatable to them to bring them into that conversation?
So it's more than just a seniors conversation. It's
Oh,
also a life conversation. Mm.
it is everybody's conversation. My daughter skates. How many times within a season do you hear that somebody has a concussion?
Mhm.
So accidents can happen just like that at any age. So no, the conversation doesn't have to be just on the aging gamut. It can just be a life conversation as part of the, hey, it's great at March break to plan a March break trip with your family. A lot of people put in more time planning a trip than they actually do thinking about, hey, is my will up to date in case something happens on that trip,
Mhm.
right?
Okay. I have a question from Sandy. She wants your thoughts on finding quality home care. With the increased demand of families needing
Mm-hmm,
to hire private care,
mm-hmm,
as you've highlighted, lots of private providers are popping up, and I
mm-hmm.
find it difficult to navigate who is reliable and well-trained, etc.
Yeah. So I think a couple things that you'd want to check out before having somebody in your home. So what tends to happen with the private care providers, they do a screening on their employees to make sure that they don't have a criminal background, that they have the appropriate training. What I would ask is to see whatever company you're considering, to see their policy and procedure for hiring. I would probably also ask to see what the person's certification is. So an example would be, let's say what the person at home needs is something like just reminders, help with a meal, help with maybe dressing, and a bit of, a bit of light housekeeping or something like that. That's fine. That doesn't require the same sort of skill level as somebody who requires memory care, who needs assistance with all 5 ADLs of living. So you'd want to be checking out the qualification of the person being sent to you. I think you'd also want to check in the first little bit, if you do hire somebody, what the compatibility is, because it is a long day when you're with a person who starts off as a stranger. I would also want to make sure that the company that you're hiring through, that their employee is bonded and insured, because you are bringing somebody in your house. So you have to be careful of things like if there's freezing rain, and the stairs are covered with ice to get into your house and stuff like that. Let's say you have stairs within your house. So I think you need to screen, you need to take a look at the policy. And I think a good thing would be also, I tend to like word of mouth, because at least you're talking to somebody who has had real experience with a certain company, with a certain caregiver. And I think that is an important thing, as opposed to doing, an initial search on the internet's fine, and that's how you get your list of companies to call. I think part of it also a bit of a feel. You want to go in, check it out, talk to the owner, and see if there's any testimonials as well.
Mhm. So experience is
Hmm.
definitely an asset here.
Well, especially, yeah, because you're opening, in our case, we were opening up our house to strangers, and they were in our house all day while we were out at work. And that's an idea you really have to get used to, that you want to make sure that the person that you have there is capable, reliable, efficient, trustworthy,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's the living in place
Hmm.
challenge, right? Is
Yeah.
you're not in somebody else's place, you're in your
Yes.
own place.
Hmm.
Interesting. What about, are you encountering situations where children are having to pay for their parents?
Yes. In fact, two friends of mine are helping pay for private care with their mums. And shockingly, both mums have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. They're on wait lists to get into nursing homes. The care price, because it's $30, it's, let's say, approximately $30 an hour with a minimum time requirement of about 3 hours. So, you're looking at $100 a day. That's, $100 a day times 7 days a week. So yeah, I am encountering people who are helping parents pay for private care for, helping mom help dad. And part of that comes from the idea of, is it better to keep care in their house? That way you can live to some extent an independent life, or bringing them inside your own home, and that is a very, very different situation. So it might be, in some cases, better to assist parents to help pay, to let them maintain their independence as long as possible.
Okay. And what about family dynamics and all this? Do you have situations where, the family doesn't want to cooperate, or how do you handle that?
That's a very difficult one. That is very difficult. It's such an emotional experience to go through the care and possible death of a parent. Not everybody's on the same page. Everybody has possibly different views about what they want the outcome to be. Some kids are looking at the faster the better because then I can get my hands on my inheritance. You get another child thinking, I will do everything I possibly can to um, prolong mom or dad or whoever's life as long as possible, and that's going to come at a cost. Um, I think we really need to be conscious when we're advising clients on how they interact with, their fellow POA or their fellow executor. We want to try to advise them not to be accusatory at all. You didn't do this while mom was dying. You didn't do that, as opposed to, I felt that I needed more support. I think we need to change how we're directing our clients to have conversations with their family or friends about somebody's care. It tends to be a very, you know, it's from what I've seen and what I've experienced, caregiving tends to be a bit of a one-sided equation. There tends to be one person where most of the duty falls on, whether you're a power of attorney, whether you're an executor. I think that in itself is family dynamics, and I think it's making sure that that person has the right tools and resources to help express their need for help. What's common is that when help is offered, a lot of times people want to say, no, 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 I can do this all myself, even though you're drowning. I think it's opening up and saying, I do need help. Where can I get the help? Who can help me? And as an advisor, having those non-financial conversations, helping them, use you as a buffer, ask for help, or, what can you do to help? Like, would it be helpful if you showed them how to arrange grocerygateway.com delivering groceries, stuff like that? Like, what can you do to help, just technology-wise?
Right. Okay. What about aging in place versus going to a retirement home? You often think, oh, if I stay in my own home, it's going to be a lot cheaper.
Okay, so from our experience, it was not. Because my mom required that much help, we were paying probably about $11,500 to $12,000 a month. When we moved her to the retirement home, and it was a special unit for memory care, the cost actually went down to $10,000. So I think it really depends on what type of care is needed and what type of lifestyle is needed. So if minimal amounts of care are needed, aging in place is quite affordable. If high levels of care are needed and those services are being brought into the home, that can be quite expensive. So I think it really depends on what is your budget. Can your budget afford moving to a retirement home? How long does that budget last before your resources start dwindling and you need more care? So remember, with retirement homes, it's a little different than a nursing home. There's like a menu option of services. So for instance, for my mom at the retirement home, within the cost of $10,000 a month, one bath a week was included. Well, my mom was used to having a shower every day, so that came at a cost of an extra $10 per shower. So what services do you want? It goes like a menu. So I think you need to look at really what is your budget.
So there's kind of a tipping point. There's a point where
Absolutely.
you're supposed to stay in your home, and there's a point where you need to consider another arrangement.
That, and I think when you're staying in your home, who is coming into your home? So if it's a caregiver and you're paying for it, that's fine. But if it's also the expectation of my kids are going to come every other day to check up on me, or the light bulb's burnt out, they're going to rush over and change it. There's been a snowstorm, they're going to shovel their driveway and rush over to my house and shovel my driveway, that sort of thing. I think you have to be realistic about what expectation you're putting on your kids. And are they able to do it? Are they even within the vicinity that it makes sense for them to be a caregiver?
Okay. I have a question from Joanne. Proverbial question. What happens if the money is gone after a period of time? What happens to people, or what are the options for people who kind of don't have the money anymore?
Well, if you're living on your own and you don't have the money, what tends to happen is on a nursing home list, you're moved up as far as urgency goes or crisis goes, because there's no money to bring in care. CCAC can only provide X, and if it's not enough, what will happen is still in home, they'll provide as much care as they can. And then if you still require more, and CCAC, or sorry, I'm using the word CCAC, Lynn, sees that, you are then, the urgency of getting you into a place for care increases. So you move higher up the list.
Okay, so there are options that kind of get covered by the government. Is that fair to say?
There are. Unfortunately, it does take a lot of planning. It does take a lot of time. And the new criterion to get into a nursing home is you need to be able to not do 2 ADLs. So that could be, I can't feed myself and I can't dress myself. I can't transfer myself. I can't toilet myself before you can apply to a nursing home. Okay. So you have to be on a scale of really requiring help, and then also obviously the financial aspect. Sorry, I can't afford to live in my house, or I'm living in a rental, so I don't have the funds, and I can't go to a retirement home.
And would a retirement home be covered by the government, or?
No. Retirement is client paid. It's out of pocket.
Okay, so you still. So
it's like
so you really don't have any money. You're in trouble.
Right. We'll rephrase that. If you don't have money, a lot more planning has to go into what's going to happen to you. You need to make the contacts within your community and let them know what the situation is, that care is needed. They come in and do an assessment, and from that assessment, they will provide a recommendation.
Okay.
Because they don't, the end result is no one wants somebody in the community at risk for their own personal safety. Yeah.
Okay. So the government kind of steps in at that point. Or the
Linwood, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, let me just check and see if I've got other questions. Yes, I do.
Okay.
Orlando has a question.
Okay.
Have you experienced navigating a situation when the senior has assets to afford the in-home care, the children support more care being brought in, doctors and PSW support the need for more care. However, the senior pushes back based on the cost and based on always living frugally and not likely to overpay for things. So they consider that $30 an hour is too expensive or more expensive than necessary. So what do you deal with someone who doesn't want to spend the money, or?
That's a bit of a reality check for the person who needs the care and has the resources. I think what I would do in that case is make it as transparent as possible, that here are the things you need help with. Here are the things that you don't. Which on the list of things you need help with can you do without? Okay, you're telling me that you can't do without it. This is going to come at a cost of X dollars. Or let's set aside, let's say the person's sitting with $500,000 or $1 million of assets, but they just don't want to touch that for care. Maybe section it out a little bit. Okay, we're going to put aside $100,000 to help you maintain your dignity and your independence at home. But if this is something you don't want your dignity maintained, you don't want your independence, what we can look at is applying to a nursing home. Take them on a tour of the other living options that don't cost as much money as bringing in-home care in. So take them on a tour of a nursing home in and around their area. And I find that actually is a big reality check, because if you have the choice of saying, okay, I can afford $100 a day to bring somebody in, but you don't want to. If you actually went to a nursing home on bath day, on physiotherapy day, and take a tour around and see, is that the type of frugal living environment that I would like? I would probably suggest that to them. Take them on a tour.
Okay, so give them a reality check, give them the
so.
option, and allow them to make an informed decision.
I really think so. I can feel for them. My parents were like that to some extent. My mom, when she was looking at the cost of what this was what this was costing. It was, well, cancel the physiotherapist. And it's like, Mom, well, you have limited use of your hands. This is helping maintain what's use is there. She had a hard time with the expense. And then the hard conversation came up, hey, Mom, we can apply at this point now, before she was diagnosed with dementia, we can apply to a nursing home now, get you on a list, and it would be far cheaper. Would you prefer that? And she was adamant, there's no way you're going to put me in a nursing home. Okay, Mom. So we're doing the best we can. This is coming as a cost. Are you still comfortable with this? And then it was yes when she saw what the cheaper alternative was. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a hard conversation. I don't want to misinform anyone that these conversations are easy. They're not. They're difficult. They're emotional, and I think part of the emotion also comes from us. We have to deal with our own. Have we done these things before we're advising our clients on this is the stuff we should be doing? Have we done it? Do we have an updated power of attorney? Do we have an updated will? Have we spoken to our significant other about end of life? Have we put those plans in place? Have we started saving for our health care?
Right. Do our children know what we want?
Yeah. Absolutely.
They're all really, really important questions.
Yeah.
Well, Neela, that's all the questions we have for today. Thank you so much for doing this presentation. It's been very informative, and I'm sure our designation holders will be much better informed and at least have ways of thinking about starting the conversation with their clients. So for those of you out there, thank you very much for joining our webinar today. The next two webinars will be on elder abuse, and so we look forward to seeing you at the end of January 28th for our next webinar. Bye now.
Okay, great. Thank you.